Look around you right now. Count the screens. Go ahead. Count them. The phone in your hand, the television on the wall, the laptop on the desk, the monitor at work, the tablet on the nightstand, the screen in your car. You are surrounded by screens. More screens than any generation in human history. The average person in the developed world now looks at a screen for more than 7 hours a day. 7 hours! That is more time than you spend eating, exercising, and talking to your family combined. Screens are the single most important interface between you and the entire digital world. Now here is a question almost nobody thinks to ask. Where were those screens made? Who built the glass you are staring at right now? The answer, for almost every screen you own, is the same: China. One country now makes the screens the entire world looks at. And the story of how that happened is one of the most stunning reversals in the history of technology, because the companies that used to own the screen just sold their own factories to the people who replaced them. Remember that detail. Sold their own factories. Because by the end of this video, you will understand how China went from having almost no ability to make a screen to controlling over 76% of all display production on the planet, and why the former kings of the screen industry are now watching from the sideline. If you enjoy stories about how entire industries quietly change hands while nobody is paying attention, hit like and subscribe so you never miss one. And this is not some abstract industry story happening far away. This is about the object you are looking at right now. The screen you are reading these words on. There is a very high chance it was made in a Chinese factory by a Chinese company you have never heard of, and then put inside a brand you trust. Samsung, Sony, Philips, your laptop maker, your phone maker. The screen inside your device and the name on the outside are often two completely different companies. That Samsung television in your living room? There is a real chance the LCD panel inside it was made by BOE, a Chinese company. That Sony TV, BOE panels have been found inside Sony models. Philips, Hisense, and dozens of other brands, Chinese-made panels inside, a trusted Western or Korean name on the outside. You bought the brand, China made the screen, and nobody told you, because nobody had to. The brands buy from whoever makes the cheapest, best panel. And increasingly, that is China. And increasingly, the company that made the screen is Chinese. What that means for you, for the price you pay, for the quality you get, and for who controls the technology you depend on every single day, that is what this story is about. To understand how shocking this is, you need to know what the screen industry used to look like. Because it was not Chinese at all. It was the opposite. The story starts in Japan, and it starts with secrecy. In the 1980s and 90s, Japan dominated the world of screens. Sharp, the Japanese electronics company, was the king of LCD technology, liquid crystal displays, the flat screens that would eventually replace the old, bulky televisions in every home. Sharp guarded its LCD technology like a state secret. Workers at its factories reportedly saw warning signs at the entrances telling them that technical drawings were classified and that leaking them would have severe consequences. Japan intended to keep the screen to itself. Then South Korea entered the game. Samsung and LG, backed by aggressive government support, poured billions into building their own LCD factories. They studied the technology, hired engineers, and invested relentlessly until they overtook Japan. By the mid-2000s, South Korea was the undisputed king of screens. Samsung and LG together dominated the global display market. Japan's lead was broken. Sharp stumbled. The great Japanese display makers, Sony, Hitachi, Toshiba, eventually merged their struggling LCD divisions into a single company called Japan Display. It has been losing money ever since. Another Japanese OLED maker, called OLED, went bankrupt in 2023. Japan, the inventor of the modern screen, was finished as a major display power. Think about how stunning that is. Japan created the liquid crystal display. Japanese engineers pioneered the technology that put a flat screen in every home on Earth. And within 2 decades, Japan went from absolute ruler to bankrupt bystander. Japan Display, the company formed from Sony, Hitachi, and Toshiba's combined LCD divisions, has been bleeding money since the day it was created. It bet everything on Apple, making LCD screens for iPhones, and then Apple switched to OLED, and Japan Display's main revenue stream evaporated overnight. A country that invented the screen could not hold on to the screen. That is how fast this industry moves. And if Japan, with all its engineering brilliance, could lose its lead in a single generation, what makes anyone think Korea's lead is safe? South Korea took the throne. Samsung and LG were the new rulers. Their OLED screens went into the world's best televisions and smartphones. Their names were synonymous with display quality. And for years, it seemed like that lead was permanent. It was not, because while Korea was celebrating, China was building. Here is how it happened, and it follows the exact same pattern you have seen in every video on this channel. China wanted screens. It needed screens for its booming phone industry, its television market, its computers, everything. But it could not make them. In the early 2000s, China suffered from what the industry called screen famine. It had to import almost every display panel it used, paying billions to Korean and Japanese manufacturers. The country that was becoming the factory of the world could make almost everything, except the screen to put on it. So China did what it always does. It decided to build its own. And to understand how deep the humiliation of the screen famine ran, consider this. In the early 2000s, Chinese factories were assembling televisions, laptops, and phones for the entire world. But the most expensive, most critical component inside each one, the screen, had to be imported. China was assembling the product, but did not control the product. It was like a car factory that could build every part of the car except the engine, forced to buy the engine from a rival and assemble it into a machine that carried someone else's profit margin. The dependence was total, and the cost was enormous. Every time a Chinese company needed a screen for a phone, a television, or a laptop, it was writing a check to Seoul or Tokyo. The profits flowed out. The technology stayed behind. For a nation building the most advanced manufacturing ecosystem on Earth, this was an intolerable gap, a hole in the center of its industrial ambitions that it was determined to fill, whatever the cost. Billions of dollars a year, flowing out of China and into the pockets of Korean and Japanese screen makers. For a country that had made self-sufficiency a national obsession, that was not just a business problem. It was a strategic vulnerability. The government identified display panels as a strategic industry and poured in massive support. Companies like BOE, originally a struggling state-linked electronics firm, received billions in funding to build enormous display factories called fabs, each one costing several $billion. The spending was staggering. Critics called it wasteful. Western analysts questioned whether China could ever match Korea's quality and scale. BOE was mocked as a money pit. Year after year, BOE reported losses. Analysts wrote it off as a textbook case of wasteful government spending, a company propped up by the state that would never compete on quality. Western business magazines ran stories questioning why China was burning billions on a doomed effort to make screens nobody wanted. But here is what those analysts missed, and it is the same thing they always miss. BOE was not trying to make a profit in year one. It was building the infrastructure to dominate in year 10. Each factory it built was larger, each generation of technology was closer to the frontier, and each year the gap with Korea narrowed. The losses were the price of learning, and learning, as we have seen again and again, is the one investment China never stops making. Sound familiar? It should. They said the same thing about BYD, about Huawei, about every Chinese company that was laughed at before it won. BOE kept building. TCL launched its own display division, called CSOT. Another company, HKC, entered the race. Factory after factory went up across China, in Hefei, Chengdu, Wuhan, Shenzhen. Each one bigger and more advanced than the last. And each one producing millions of display panels, driving prices down, flooding the market with cheaper screens. The sheer volume was unlike anything the industry had ever seen. While Korean companies built one or two new factories a decade, China was building several at once, in different cities, all at the same time. It was a manufacturing blitz, a deliberate overwhelming of the market through pure scale. At first, the quality was mediocre. Korean screens were still clearly better. Reviewers mocked early Chinese panels for uneven backlighting, washed-out colors, and poor viewing angles. The gap was real, and the Korean companies pointed to it as proof that their lead was safe. But the Chinese companies were learning, exactly the way they learned in every other industry, absorbing the technology, hiring engineers, improving relentlessly, generation after generation, until the gap closed. And when it closed fast. Here is where we are now, and the numbers are almost hard to believe. China accounts for approximately 76% of all display production capacity on the planet. Let that sink in. More than 3/4 of all the screens made on Earth come from China. In LCD television panels specifically, Chinese companies control over 70% of global production. BOE alone holds roughly 26%. TCL-CSOT holds 20%. HKC holds 14%. Between just those three companies, they produce more TV screens than the rest of the world combined. And it is not just LCD anymore. In OLED, the premium, high-end screen technology that powers the best smartphones and televisions, Chinese manufacturers surpassed South Korea for the first time in smartphone panels, capturing over 50% of global shipments. Samsung, the former absolute ruler of OLED, now shares the field. But here is the detail that tells you the game is truly over for the old guard. LG Display, one of the two Korean giants that once ruled the screen world, just sold its last LCD television panel factory to China, to TCL-CSOT, for $1.5 billion. Read that again. LG did not lose to China in a market battle. It sold its own factory to China. It handed the keys to the building and walked away. Samsung did the same thing earlier, selling its Suzhou LCD plant to TCL. The former kings of the screen are literally selling the castles to their successors. Picture that scene for a moment. LG Display, one of the proudest names in Korean technology, a company that helped dethrone Japan and ruled the screen world for 2 decades, signing a contract to hand over the keys of its own factory to a Chinese company. The machines, the production lines, the know-how embedded in the walls, all of it transferred for $1.5 billion. It is the corporate equivalent of a king handing his crown to the conqueror and walking out the gate. And it happened not because LG was stupid, or lazy, or made a mistake. It happened because the economics left no other choice. And this is not because Samsung and LG went stupid, it is because the economics became impossible. Chinese companies, backed by massive government support and operating at staggering scale, drove LCD prices so low that Korean manufacturers could no longer make a profit on them. Every LCD panel was being sold at or below cost. The Chinese companies could absorb the losses because of government backing and sheer volume. The Korean companies could not, and it was not even close. BOE, TCLC, and HKC collectively posted over $1.5 billion in net profit in the first half of 2025 alone, at LCD prices that were destroying their Korean competitors. They had found the sweet spot, low enough prices to kill the competition, high enough volume to still make money. It is a strangling game. You set the price just low enough that your rival bleeds, but you survive because you are bigger. And you keep squeezing until they sell you their factory and leave, which is exactly what happened. So they retreated, abandoning LCD and concentrating on OLED, the premium segment, where margins were still good. But now China is coming for OLED too. BOE is building an 8.6 generation OLED factory in Chengdu, a plant costing 63 billion yuan, roughly $8.7 billion. TCL-CSOT is developing a new OLED printing technology that could produce OLED screens more cheaply than the methods Samsung uses. Industry analysts predict that China will overtake South Korea in OLED production capacity by 2029. The retreat to OLED was supposed to be the safe ground. It is not safe anymore. And here is the detail that should terrify Samsung. TCL-CSOT is developing a technology called inkjet printed OLED. Instead of the expensive, wasteful vacuum process that Samsung uses, this method essentially prints the OLED material onto the glass, like an inkjet printer laying down dots of light. If it works at scale, and early results suggest it will, it could produce OLED screens at a fraction of the cost, with less waste, and on larger sheets of glass. It would do to Samsung's OLED what Chinese LCD did to Korean LCD, undercut it on cost until the margins collapse. The weapon that killed Japan is now being aimed at Korea. And this time Korea can see it coming, but that does not mean it can stop it. And the scale of what China built to get here is worth pausing on. A single modern display fab, the factory that makes these panels, costs anywhere from $4 to $9 billion to build. China did not build one. It built dozens. Across Hefei, Chengdu, Wuhan, Shenzhen, Kunming, and more. Each one a cathedral of clean rooms and precision machinery, capable of producing millions of panels a year. The total investment, across all the fabs, across 2 decades, runs into the hundreds of billions of dollars. No private company could have done this alone. It took a national strategy, government money, and the willingness to lose money for years in pursuit of a goal that most of the world thought was unachievable. And now that the fabs are built, the capacity is online, and the technology has caught up, the investment is paying off. The factories cannot be unboot. The knowledge cannot be unlearned. The lead, once taken, compounds. Every year, every new generation, China gets further ahead. Now, I have to be honest with you, because this channel does not deal in fantasy. Samsung is not dead. In the highest-end OLED, the screens in the most expensive phones, the most advanced televisions, Samsung still leads in quality and commands higher margins. The upstream materials and equipment needed to make screens, the specialized chemicals, the ultra-precise machinery, are still largely controlled by Japan, the United States, and South Korea. China dominates in volume and in capacity, but at the very top of the pyramid, Korea still holds an edge. This is not the end of Samsung, not yet. But the pattern is unmistakable. China now makes more screens than anyone. It controls the LCD market almost completely. It has overtaken Korea in smartphone OLED by volume. It is building the factories to take OLED TV next. And the former kings, Japan, then Korea, are retreating, step by step, to a shrinking high ground. So step back and look at the bigger picture. The screen industry followed the exact same path as every industry we have covered on this channel. A technology starts in the West or in Japan. It moves to Korea. Korea dominates for a generation. Then China enters, builds at massive scale, accepts lower margins, drives prices down, and takes over. First LCD. Now OLED. The companies that guarded their secrets, that built walls around their technology, that believed their lead was permanent, watched it evaporate. Japan's Sharp put up warning signs to keep its technology from leaking. 20 years later, China makes 76% of the world's screens. The warning signs did not work. They never do. And here is the deepest irony of all. The pattern has repeated so many times now that you would think someone would learn. Japan held the screen. Korea took it. Now China is taking it from Korea. Each generation believed its lead was permanent. Each generation was wrong. Japan's Sharp put up those warning signs at the factory gates, convinced that secrecy would protect them. It did not. Samsung and LG invested billions, confident that their technological edge was unassailable. It was not. And now, as China builds OLED factories that dwarf anything before them, the question is not whether China will dominate the next generation of screens. The question is whether anyone will be left to compete at all. Solar panels, batteries, phones, drones, cars, and now the screen, the single most looked at object in modern life. Each time, the same story. Each time, the same ending. And here is the part that should give everyone pause. The United States has zero domestic display panel manufacturing capacity. Every screen in every American home, every office, every military device, every hospital monitor, made overseas, predominantly in China. If screens are the window through which the entire modern world sees everything, then one country now controls the window, and it is not the country you might have expected. And it goes deeper than just manufacturing. Think about what a screen actually is in the modern world. It is not just a piece of hardware. It is the gateway to everything. Every piece of news you read, every video you watch, every message you send, every photo you take, every transaction you make, passes through a screen. Whoever makes the screen controls the physical object that stands between you and the entire digital world. In an era when people spend 7, 8, 10 hours a day staring at a display, the display is arguably the most important piece of technology in human civilization. And 76% of global production is now concentrated in a single country. Whether that feels like an opportunity or a vulnerability depends on where you are standing. But either way, it is a fact the world has barely started to grapple with. There is a phrase that keeps coming up in the display industry: the one who controls the panel controls the product. A smartphone without a screen is a paperweight. A television without a panel is a box. A car dashboard without a display is a blank wall. Every finished electronic product depends on the screen, and the screen now comes from China. That gives Chinese panel makers a quiet, enormous leverage over the entire global electronics supply chain, a leverage most consumers have never heard of and most companies try not to think about too loudly. So let us go back to where we started. Look around you. Count the screens. Go ahead. Count them. Your phone, your TV, your laptop, your monitor, the screen in your car. Every single one of them, with almost no exception, contains a panel that was made in a Chinese factory by a Chinese company that most people have never heard of and placed inside a brand you trust without you ever knowing. You did not choose Chinese screens. Nobody asked you. You did not even know they were Chinese. But they are, all of them. The screen you are watching this video on right now was almost certainly made in China, and the companies that used to make it, the Japanese giants that guarded the secret, the Korean titans that took the throne, have either gone bankrupt, retreated, or sold their own factories to the companies that replaced them. The screen war is over, and China won it so quietly that most of the world has not even noticed yet. And that might be the most remarkable part of this whole story. When China took over solar panels, it was in the news. When China took over electric cars, people noticed. When Huawei came back from the dead, it made headlines. But the screens? Nobody talked about the screens. There was no dramatic moment, no single headline, no viral video. It happened panel by panel, factory by factory, contract by contract, in clean rooms and boardrooms that most people will never see. One day Korea made your screen, the next day China did, and you never even noticed the change because the screen in front of you looked exactly the same. The quietest takeover in the history of technology happened right in front of your eyes, on the very screen China was taking over. If this changed how you think about the screens all around you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this is exactly the kind of story we tell here. And here is my question for you. Look around you right now. How many screens can you count? And do you know where a single one of them was made? Tell me in the comments.